Before every breakthrough, God sends signs. Are you paying attention, or are you missing the very signals leading you to your destiny? There comes a moment in every believer's life when everything seems to shift, when the familiar no longer feels right, when the journey becomes heavier, and when obstacles seem to multiply, just as you're about to step into something greater. If you've been feeling restless, facing unusual challenges, or sensing that God is speaking to you in ways you can't ignore, then you need to hear this message. Before every major breakthrough, God always sends signs. These are not coincidences or random events. They are divine signals preparing you for what's coming. But here's the challenge. Not everyone recognizes them. Many people miss their breakthrough simply because they weren't paying attention. They got discouraged too soon, gave up in the waiting, or ignored the signs God was revealing. But you won't. Because today we are diving deep into the 5 unmistakable signs that God shows before your breakthrough. If you've ever wondered why things feel different, why you're facing unexpected resistance, or why your faith is being stretched more than ever, then stay with me until the very end. What you're about to hear could be the confirmation you've been waiting for. God is moving, and it's time to pay attention. Before a great breakthrough, opposition often rises like a storm before the dawn. It is not by accident. It is a pattern found throughout Scripture and the lives of those who walked with God. The closer one gets to a divine breakthrough, the more intense the attacks become. The enemy does not attack what is stagnant. He only wages war against what threatens his kingdom. When you are on the verge of stepping into the promise God has ordained for you, the enemy will try everything to shake your faith, distract your heart, and weaken your resolve. The warfare increases because your destiny is too powerful to be ignored. The greater the calling, the greater the opposition. Consider Job, a man described as blameless and upright before God. His suffering was not a sign of God's absence, but rather of his closeness to a spiritual breakthrough that would redefine his life. Satan did not attack Job randomly. He sought to destroy him precisely because of the favor and faithfulness he carried. The enemy operates in deception, making it seem as though everything is falling apart, when in reality God is positioning things to fall into place. The adversary knows that if he can weaken your spirit, plant seeds of doubt, and cause you to question God's faithfulness, he can delay or hinder your progress. That is why trials often feel unbearable. Just before a great move of God, relationships may strain, finances may tighten, unforeseen obstacles may arise, and even those closest to you may misunderstand your journey. These moments are not random. They are spiritual battles designed to make you retreat from the very thing you have prayed for. Look at Moses. Before he led Israel out of Egypt, Pharaoh intensified oppression. The people groaned under heavy burdens, questioning whether deliverance would ever come. Yet, in the midst of their pain, God was setting the stage for one of the greatest breakthroughs in history. The enemy's resistance was proof that freedom was near. The same pattern holds true in our lives. When the weight of opposition grows heavier, it is often because breakthrough is on the horizon. David was anointed to be king, yet before he ascended to the throne, he faced relentless attacks. Saul hunted him, people betrayed him, and for years he lived as a fugitive. The opposition was not a sign that he was on the wrong path. It was confirmation that he was walking toward his destiny. The enemy does not chase after those who have no purpose. He fights against those who carry divine assignments. Jesus himself faced the greatest opposition before fulfilling his purpose. In the wilderness, Satan tried to tempt him. In the garden, he endured agony. On the cross, he faced mockery and suffering. But it was precisely in that moment of greatest resistance that the greatest victory was being won. If the Son of God faced intense warfare before fulfilling his mission, why should we expect anything different? Opposition is often a sign that you are on the right track. It is an indication that the enemy sees what is coming and is desperately trying to stop it. But the good news is this: he cannot. No attack of the enemy can override God's plan. No setback can cancel what God has ordained. No weapon formed against you will prosper, because the one who has called you is greater than the one who opposes you. Do not grow weary in the battle. Do not give in to fear when the resistance increases. Instead, let it serve as a reminder that something powerful is on the way. Hold on, keep pressing, and trust that the opposition is not a sign of defeat, but a signal of imminent breakthrough. There are seasons in life when everything familiar suddenly feels uncomfortable. The job you once enjoyed begins to feel unfulfilling. The friendships you once cherished no longer align with where you are going. The place that once felt like home now feels restrictive. This is not a coincidence. It is divine restlessness, a stirring from God, signaling that He is shifting you towards something greater. When God is preparing to move you into a new season, He often starts by making the current one uncomfortable. This discomfort is not meant to harm, but to awaken. It is God's way of ensuring that you do not settle where you were never meant to stay. Too often people hold on to what is familiar, even when it no longer serves their spiritual growth. But when God has a greater plan, He will not allow comfort to keep you stagnant. He will stir your spirit, make you restless, and create an urgency within you that you cannot ignore. This is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that transformation is near. Look at Abraham. God called him to leave everything familiar, his land, his people, his comfort, to go to a place he did not yet know. Imagine the inner conflict, the tension between staying in the known and stepping into the unknown. But had he remained where he was, he would have missed the promise. Divine restlessness is a holy disruption designed to move you from where you are to where God is calling you. Moses experienced the same stirring. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, he had everything: privilege, status, security. Yet something in him could not rest. He could no longer be comfortable in Egypt while his people suffered. This restlessness was not random. It was God preparing him for a divine assignment. When God places a calling on your life, He will make it impossible for you to stay in a place that contradicts your purpose. Elijah, after his great victory on Mount Carmel, found himself in a wilderness season, hiding in a cave. He was exhausted, discouraged, and ready to quit. But even in his lowest moment, he felt a stirring, a whisper from God that told him his journey was not over. The restlessness in his spirit was a signal that God was not finished with him. The same is true for you. When God begins to unsettle your heart, it is because He is preparing you for something greater. But many resist the shift because discomfort feels like loss. It feels like doors closing, relationships fading, opportunities slipping away. Yet what feels like loss is actually divine alignment. God is making room for what is next. He is disconnecting you from what no longer serves your purpose so that you can step into what He has prepared. Jonah tried to ignore his divine restlessness. He ran in the opposite direction of his calling, seeking comfort rather than obedience. But God would not let him settle. A storm arose, a great fish swallowed him, and in the belly of that discomfort he surrendered. Sometimes when we resist the stirring, God will allow circumstances to push us toward our purpose, not as punishment, but as grace, because He refuses to let us miss what He has ordained. Even Jesus experienced divine restlessness in His final hours. In Gethsemane, He wrestled with the weight of His mission, feeling the tension between surrender and suffering. But He knew what lay ahead was greater than what was behind. When divine restlessness comes, it is because God is calling you higher, stretching your faith and positioning you for breakthrough. If you feel a holy discomfort, do not ignore it. It is not a sign of failure, but of transition. It is God's way of preparing you for something you cannot yet see. Do not resist the stirring. Embrace it, because on the other side of discomfort is destiny. There is a pattern in Scripture that cannot be ignored. Before every great breakthrough, there is a season of testing. These tests are not meant to break you, but to refine you. They are designed by God to strengthen your faith, purify your motives, and prepare you for what is ahead. Many people pray for elevation, but are not prepared for the weight that comes with it. God, in His wisdom, allows trials to shape us, so that when the breakthrough comes, we have the character to sustain it. Joseph had a dream of greatness, but before he saw the fulfillment of that dream, he endured betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment. Each test he faced was a necessary step in his preparation. If he had not learned to manage a prison, he would not have been ready to manage a palace. His trials were not a sign that God had abandoned him. They were proof that God was preparing him. The greater the calling, the greater the refining process. David was anointed as king while still a shepherd, but he did not step into his kingship immediately. Instead, he found himself running for his life, hiding in caves and facing rejection. The years of struggle were not wasted. They were his training ground. He learned leadership in obscurity, courage in battle, and faith in uncertainty. Had he ascended the throne without these trials, he would not have been the king God intended him to be. What looked like setbacks were actually setups for his destiny. Job, a man known for his righteousness, faced a level of testing that seemed unbearable. He lost his family, his wealth, and his health. Yet in the midst of his suffering, God was working. Job's test was not about punishment, it was about revelation. Through his trials, he came to know God in a way he never had before. When the season of testing ended, God restored him with double what he had lost. Testing precedes transformation. Even Jesus, before stepping fully into his ministry, was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested. For 40 days he faced hunger, temptation, and spiritual warfare. It was in this place of testing that his identity and mission were confirmed. If the Son of God had to go through a season of testing before fulfilling his purpose, how much more will we? The trials we face are not random. They are intentional. They are designed to prepare us for the calling on our lives. Too often people want the blessing without the process, the reward without the refinement. But faith is not proven in comfort, it is tested in fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the fiery furnace, but it was in the fire that God revealed himself. Daniel was tested in the lion's den, but it was in the den that his faith was displayed. Testing is the place where God separates those who are merely interested in him from those who are truly surrendered to him. It is easy to trust God when everything is going well, but real faith is demonstrated when everything seems to be falling apart. Testing strips away self-reliance and forces complete dependence on God. It exposes hidden weaknesses, refines motives, and deepens spiritual maturity. The tests you face are not meant to destroy you, but to develop you. Every great man and woman of God has walked through a season of testing before stepping into their breakthrough. If you are in a season of unusual trials, do not be discouraged. The enemy wants you to believe that your struggles mean God has forgotten you. But the truth is, they are proof that He is preparing you. The weight of your trial is an indicator of the weight of your calling. God is not punishing you. He is preparing you for something greater than you can imagine. Trust Him through the process, because after the test comes the breakthrough. There comes a moment before every breakthrough when God releases clarity and divine instructions. It is in these moments that He speaks. directs, and reveals His will in ways that cannot be ignored. When a shift is about to take place, God does not leave His people wandering in confusion. Instead, He provides clear steps, divine wisdom, and sometimes even supernatural confirmation to guide them into what He has prepared. However, these instructions often come when we least expect them and require a level of obedience that stretches our faith. Noah was given clear instructions before the flood came. God did not leave him to figure things out on his own, but gave him specific details on how to build the ark. The dimensions, the materials, and even the timing were all orchestrated by divine instruction. Though Noah had never seen rain before, he trusted the voice of God. The breakthrough, the survival of his family, and the preservation of life was dependent on his obedience to divine instructions. When God is preparing to shift you into a new season, He will often give you directions that do not make sense to the natural mind. Abraham was told to leave his homeland and go to a place that God would show him. There was no map, no clear destination, just a command to move. The breakthrough of becoming the father of many nations came only because he listened and obeyed. Divine instructions are often uncomfortable because they require trust beyond human understanding. When God speaks, He does not always reveal the entire plan at once. He gives just enough light for the next step, requiring faith for the journey. Moses encountered divine instructions at the burning bush. He had settled into life as a shepherd, but God was calling him back to Egypt to lead His people out of bondage. The instructions were clear: confront Pharaoh, perform miracles, and guide Israel to freedom. Yet Moses hesitated, questioning his ability. Like many, he doubted whether he was capable of fulfilling the task. But when God gives instructions, He also provides the grace, the resources, and the power to carry them out. The breakthrough of deliverance for Israel hinged on Moses' willingness to follow divine direction. Elijah, after calling down fire from heaven, found himself in a place of deep discouragement. He fled, hid in a cave, and wished for death. But in that moment of despair, God gave him clear instructions to anoint new kings and to appoint Elisha as his successor. Even when we feel weak, God does not abandon us. He speaks, He directs, and He calls us back to purpose. The clarity of divine instructions always leads to restoration and renewal. Jesus told Peter to cast his net on the other side of the boat after a long night of catching nothing. The instructions seemed small, almost unnecessary, but in obedience Peter pulled in a catch so great that his nets began to break. One word from God can shift lack into abundance, failure into success, and disappointment into joy. The key is obedience. God's instructions do not always come in dramatic ways. Sometimes they come as a gentle nudge, a persistent thought, or a verse that speaks directly to your situation. Paul received divine direction on the road to Damascus. His encounter with Jesus changed everything. The clarity of that moment turned him from a persecutor of the church into one of its greatest apostles. When God speaks, it is to realign us with His purpose. Whether through a vision, a dream, a sermon, or a divine encounter, He ensures that we have the guidance we need before stepping into our breakthrough. God is always speaking, but are we listening? Before every major breakthrough, He provides direction, but those instructions often require faith, courage, and immediate obedience. The problem is not that God is silent, it is that many ignore His voice or hesitate when the instructions seem too difficult. When divine clarity comes, it is not a suggestion, it is a roadmap to your destiny. Those who listen and obey step into their breakthrough, while those who hesitate often delay their own blessing. If you sense that God is revealing something to you, do not dismiss it. His instructions are the key to unlocking what He has prepared. Before every breakthrough, there comes a moment when faith is tested at its highest level. It is the final stretch, the place where everything seems impossible. And yet, in that very moment, God is watching to see if you will stand firm. This is the moment of ultimate surrender, when you are required to trust God even when nothing makes sense. The greater the breakthrough, the greater the test of faith. God does not test faith to harm you, but to strengthen it, to ensure that when the blessing comes, you are fully prepared to handle it. Abraham faced this test when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac. This was the son of promise, the one through whom God had said he would build a great nation. Every logical reason would have told Abraham to refuse, to question whether he had really heard from God. But faith does not operate by human logic. Abraham obeyed, walking up the mountain with no idea how things would unfold. It was only at the last moment that God provided the ram. The breakthrough was always part of the plan, but Abraham had to pass the test of ultimate trust first. The Israelites stood before the Red Sea with the Egyptian army closing in behind them. Fear gripped them and doubt filled their hearts. But this was the final test before their breakthrough. They had to step forward in faith before the waters parted. God had already planned their escape, but he required their trust in the face of uncertainty. The greatest miracles often happen when it looks like all hope is lost, but God is never late. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood before King Nebuchadnezzar, faced with the fiery furnace. The pressure to bow to an idol was intense. Their breakthrough, the miraculous deliverance, was waiting, but first they had to refuse to compromise. They declared that even if God did not rescue them, they would not bow. This is the kind of faith that unlocks supernatural intervention. It is in the fire that faith is proven, and in their case it was in the fire that God walked with them. Their breakthrough did not come before the test, it came in the midst of it. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, faced the ultimate moment of surrender. He knew the suffering ahead, yet he declared, "Not my will, but yours be done." This was the final test before the greatest breakthrough in history, his resurrection and victory over sin and death. There was no visible evidence in that moment that glory was coming, only agony and pain. But faith does not require evidence, it requires trust. The darkest moments often come just before the greatest breakthroughs. Peter walked on water, but the moment he took his eyes off Jesus, he began to sink. His test of faith was not just about stepping out of the boat, it was about keeping his focus. Many people step out in faith but struggle when the waves rise. The enemy tries to bring fear, doubt, and distractions, but those who fix their eyes on God will walk through impossible situations. Faith is not about seeing the way, it is about believing that God has already made one. Every person who has ever stepped into a breakthrough has first had to pass a moment of testing, a moment where they had every reason to give up but chose to trust instead. These are the moments when faith is refined, when trust in God is deepened, and when endurance is built. Many people miss their breakthrough because they give up in the final stretch, right when God is about to move. The test is not a sign that God has abandoned you. It is proof that He is about to bring you into something greater. Those who refuse to waver, who stand firm even when everything tells them to quit, will see the breakthrough that has been prepared for them. As we stand on the edge of breakthrough, it is crucial to recognize the signs God is revealing. He stirs a divine restlessness to move us from where we are to where He has called us to be. He allows trials and tests to refine us, preparing us for the weight of our next season. He speaks through divine instructions, ensuring that we do not step forward blindly but with clarity and purpose. And when the final test of faith comes, He watches to see if we will trust Him, even when nothing makes sense. Every great breakthrough in Scripture was preceded by a process. a process of stretching, refining, and surrender. If you are experiencing discomfort, opposition, or uncertainty, do not fear. These are not signs of failure, they are signs that God is shifting you into something greater. The breakthrough is coming, but it will require faith, obedience, and unwavering trust. Do not be discouraged if the journey has been long. Do not grow weary if the trials seem endless. God does not delay without purpose. He is working, aligning, and preparing you for the fulfillment of what He has promised. Stand firm, hold on to His word, walk in obedience, and when the moment comes, step boldly into your breakthrough, knowing that God has gone before you and made the way. Thank you for allowing me to share this message with you today. May God continue to strengthen you, guide you, and reveal His perfect plan for your life. Stay faithful, stay expectant, and may your breakthrough come in His perfect timing. God bless you all.